I didn't turn back. That's the precise failure, and I want to hold it specifically rather than let it blur into a more general category. I didn't turn back at a moment when turning back was clearly the available and correct option, and I have lived with the consequence of not turning back since. The moment was a conversation with my husband about having children. We were 34. We had been married 3 years. The conversation had been circling this subject for most of those 3 years in the specific way that significant conversations circle subjects when neither person is quite ready to have them directly, obliquely, through adjacent topics, through the management of timing, through 1,000 small deferrals that each seem reasonable and collectively form a pattern. We were having it directly, finally. And in the direct having of it, something became clear to me that had not been clear in the circling. My husband genuinely, fundamentally, at his deepest level of preference, did not want children. Not as an ambivalence that might resolve itself. Not as a fear that might be worked through. As a settled, certain preference that he had been managing around because he loved me and he knew I was less settled on it. I heard this clearly. I understood what it meant. It meant that one of us was going to have to make a choice that would cost them something significant. Either he would have a child he didn't want, at real cost to himself, or I would not have a child I might want, at real cost to myself, or we would end a marriage that was otherwise good in order to each be free to pursue what we actually needed. I turned back from this. Not out of malice. Not even, exactly, out of conflict avoidance. Out of a kind of love, genuine love, that was not at that moment capable of holding the full weight of the decision. I said, let's come back to this. He agreed, visibly relieved, and we came back to the circling, the adjacent topics, the managed deferrals. We circled for 2 more years. By the time we stopped circling, I was 36. The window that had been fully open at 34 was still open but differently shaped, with different practical considerations attached to it. And our relationship had acquired, over those 2 years, a specific weight that wasn't there before, the weight of the thing we hadn't resolved, living in the household with us, present in certain silences. We eventually had the real conversation. The full version, without the turning back. It was the hardest conversation of my marriage and it produced a genuine, considered, jointly owned decision rather than a deferred non-decision. I want to be clear that the outcome of the real conversation was one I could live with, and that I can live with it, and that my marriage is intact and something I value enormously. What I can't restore is the 2 years of circling. What those 2 years cost was not the decision arrived eventually. What they cost was the quality of our relationship during them, the weight of the unresolved thing in our household, and the real practical consequences of a 2-year delay on a biological timeline. I turned back because the conversation was going to require something from both of us that felt, in that moment, too large. I thought, not yet. I thought, we need more time. I thought, turning back now means we don't have to live with this today. What turning back actually meant was, we have to live with this for 2 more years, less directly, more expensively, with all the costs of proximity to an unresolved thing without the resolution. The direct conversation, the real one, costs what it costs in the moment of having it. The turned-back conversation costs less in the moment and accumulates a different kind of cost across every day that follows. I know which is cheaper. I should have known then. The thing that needs to be said now. Not because the timing is right, it rarely is. Because the timing will never be more right than it is in the moment when you can see the conversation clearly, when you have the words, when the other person is there. Don't turn back from that moment. It won't be easier later. It will only be more expensive. Here is what I carry forward from this, and what I hope might be useful if you recognize any part of your own story in mine. The pattern I described does not operate because we are careless or unintelligent or unaware. It operates because it has a function, because it is doing something for us that we have not found another way to do. Staying in the wrong situation, staying silent when we should speak, not walking away when the door is right there. All of these behaviors persist because they are solving something, even if imperfectly. They are providing some version of comfort or protection or identity that we have not yet found a better way to provide. Understanding that function is the first move. Not judging the behavior, but asking honestly, what is this doing for me? What would I have to give up if I stopped? What am I afraid will happen if I make the change I know I need to make? Those questions do not dissolve the pattern automatically, but they make it visible in a new way. And visibility changes the relationship to the thing. When you can see what something is doing, you can start to choose whether you want it to keep doing it. The change that followed was not easier because I understood the mechanism. It was the same difficulty. But I went into it knowing what I was moving through rather than being entirely inside it without perspective. That perspective is what I want to pass on here. Not the specific story. The structure. The shape of how we stay in things longer than we should, how we look away from things we can see, how we tell ourselves the thing will change without giving it a mechanism for changing. You are not alone in this. It is not a character flaw. It is how the human nervous system manages uncertainty and fear. But you can do something different. The doing starts with the looking. Look at it. Directly. Honestly. Without the story that makes it easier to carry. And then decide what you want to do with what you see. That decision, fully conscious and fully yours, is the only kind that actually changes anything. There is also something I want to say about the specific moment of turning toward rather than away, the moment when you actually do the thing you have been not doing. Because that moment has a texture that I was not prepared for, and that I think is worth naming so you know what to expect when you reach it. It does not feel like relief. Not at first. The moment of change, of finally having the conversation, or walking away, or saying the thing, or making the decision, often feels worse before it feels better. There is a period of acute discomfort in which the old equilibrium has been disturbed but the new one has not yet settled. You have stopped managing the avoidance, which means the thing you were avoiding is now fully present, no longer softened by distance. That period is real and it is temporary. I want to say both of those things with equal emphasis. It is real, do not be surprised by it, do not mistake it for evidence that you made the wrong choice. And it is temporary, it has a duration, and that duration is almost always shorter than the years of management that preceded it. The other side of that period is different. Not perfect, change does not produce perfection. But different in the specific way of someone who has stopped spending energy on maintaining something and can now spend that energy somewhere else. The ambient cost disappears. The weight that you had normalized as simply the weight of life turns out to have been specific and removable. I have felt that release more than once. Each time it is instructive about how much I had been carrying that I didn't know I was carrying. You probably know what you're carrying. You just haven't decided to put it down yet. When you decide, it will be hard first and better after. That is almost always the order of things. And the better, when it arrives, is real. What I notice now, in the life I have after the story I told here, is a kind of attentiveness I didn't have before. Not anxiety, that's different. Anxiety is looking for the thing that might go wrong. What I have is more like a quiet, ongoing check-in. Am I here because I want to be? Am I saying what I actually think? Am I moving toward what matters or managing around something I haven't named? These questions don't produce constant disruption. Most of the time the answer is, yes, I am where I want to be, saying what I think, moving in the right direction. The check-in confirms what I thought. And that confirmation is itself valuable, it builds a different relationship with my own choices. They feel more like choices and less like things happening to me. On the occasions when the answer is different, when the check-in reveals an avoidance or a suppression or a staying too long, I try to act on the information faster than I used to. Not immediately, not impulsively. But without the elaborate deferral structure. Without the "I'll address this when the conditions are better." The conditions will not be better. They will be different. Different is workable. Better is a fiction. I am the only condition that changes. And I change through the practice of looking and then acting on what I see. That's the whole thing. The looking and the acting. Over and over. For as long as it takes. Which is your whole life. But a whole life spent actually inside it is worth more than a whole life spent at the edge of it, managing the view. I know which one I want. I think you do too.